I could barely breathe as I clutched the heavy wedding album in my trembling hands. The irony was suffocating. It was supposed to be a celebration, a joyous remembrance of our love. It was our 5th anniversary, and I had planned a quiet evening to revisit the happiest day of our lives. Instead, my world unraveled in the soft glow of the living room lamp. I flipped through the pages slowly, savoring every memory. There was the first look, the moment when Ethan turned around, his eyes wide with awe as I stood there in my ivory gown. My cheeks had flushed as he whispered, "You're perfect." Those words had echoed in my mind for years, a mantra of security and love. But now as I stared at the photos, something seemed off. First, it was subtle. In one image, his hand lingered a little too closely to Jessica, my maid of honor. Jessica had been my best friend since college, a vivacious, confident brunette who was as much a sister to me as anyone could be. She had been a crucial part of our wedding day, and I had never doubted her loyalty. But as I studied the album, the unease began to grow. There was a photo of Ethan and Jessica laughing together during the toasts, their faces turned toward each other with an intimacy that now felt misplaced. I brushed it off. Surely I was imagining things. Jessica was always warm and touchy. That's just who she was. Then came the shot of them during the bouquet toss. It was a candid moment, but the photographer had captured something raw. Ethan wasn't watching me, the bride, tossing the bouquet. He was watching her. His eyes, soft and almost yearning, were locked on Jessica as she laughed in the background. My stomach churned. I told myself it was ridiculous to read so much into a glance. But as I kept flipping, the evidence became harder to ignore. Ethan's hand resting lightly on Jessica's back as they walked out of the church. The way she tilted her head toward him during group photos. The stolen glances, the subtle body language. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. The photographer, bless her meticulous eye, had captured it all. By the time I reached the last page, my heart was pounding. I stared at the final photo, one of us cutting the cake, surrounded by friends and family. Jessica stood in the corner of the frame, her gaze not on me but on Ethan. Her smile wasn't one of celebration, it was private, almost intimate. I closed the album and sat back, my hands cold and clammy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to paranoia. But a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already growing roots. That night I didn't sleep. Ethan had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day at work, and I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every moment from our wedding, searching for clues I might have missed. I thought about the days leading up to it, the late-night calls Jessica and I had shared as we planned every detail. Ethan had always been kind to her, but had there been something more? Something I was too blind to see? The next morning, while Ethan was out running errands, I took out the album again. This time I searched for more than just glances and gestures. I needed proof. I flipped back to the photo credits, scanning for the name of the photographer. Clara Whitmore Photography. A quick Google search later, I had her email. I told myself I was being ridiculous as I typed the message, asking if she still had any unused photos from our wedding day. I'd like to surprise my husband with some unseen shots for our anniversary. I wrote, my fingers shaking as I hit send. It was a lie, but I didn't care. To my surprise, Clara responded within hours. She had kept a full archive of our wedding and offered to send a link to the gallery. My chest tightened as I clicked on the email attachment later that evening. Hundreds of photos loaded onto my screen, each a frozen moment of what I had believed was the happiest day of my life. I scrolled through them slowly, my heart pounding with every click. And then I saw it. There they were, standing alone by the bar during the reception. Ethan's hand rested on Jessica's waist, his thumb tracing a small, intimate circle. Her face was tilted up toward him, her smile playful, her eyes smoldering. It was the kind of look you give someone when the rest of the world doesn't matter. I felt like I was going to be sick. I kept scrolling, desperate for it to stop, but it didn't. Another photo showed them on the dance floor, her body pressed close to his. The worst was an unposed shot near the end of the night. I wasn't even in the frame. Jessica was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed, and Ethan stood inches away, his head bent low as he whispered something into her ear. Her face lit up with a mischievous smile, her hand brushing his arm. It wasn't just a friendship. It was there, undeniable in every frame. A truth I had been too blind to see on that day. My hand shook as I closed the laptop, tears streaming down my face. I wanted to confront Ethan immediately, to scream and demand answers. But I knew I couldn't, not yet. I needed to know the full story. I needed to be sure. The next few days were torture. I started watching him more closely, noticing the way his phone always seemed to be face down on the counter, the way he'd smile faintly when he got a text. Jessica had moved to another city a year ago, and I hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now I wondered, had she moved because of us? Or because of him? I scoured old text messages, emails, anything I could find. But it wasn't until I checked our shared photo cloud that I found the final nail in the coffin. A photo dated 6 months after our wedding, of Ethan and Jessica sitting together on a park bench. He was holding her hand. The truth hit me like a freight train. They hadn't stopped. What had started as a betrayal during the most sacred day of my life had continued, festering behind my back for years. I confronted him that night. His face paled as I showed him the photos, his eyes wide with panic. At first, he denied it, stammering excuses, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Finally, he broke down, admitting to the affair and begging for forgiveness. He swore it was over, that it hadn't meant anything, that he had chosen me. But his words felt hollow, his apologies meaningless. The trust we had built over a decade crumbled in an instant. I packed a bag that night and left, my heart shattered but resolute. Looking back, the signs had always been there, hidden in plain sight like the photos in that album. I had been too in love, too trusting to see them. Now, as I start the painful process of rebuilding my life, I can't help but think about Clara, the photographer, who unknowingly captured the truth I had been blind to. Her lens had revealed what my heart hadn't been ready to accept, and for that I'm strangely grateful. I spent that first night alone in a cheap motel on the edge of town. The kind of place you stay when you're running from something but don't yet know where you're headed. The room smelled faintly of mildew, and the buzzing of the neon sign outside the window felt like a cruel metaphor for the chaos in my mind. I lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, trying to comprehend the enormity of what had just happened. How could he do this to me? How could Jessica, my best friend, betray me like that? Memories came flooding back. Her reassuring hugs when I doubted myself, her laughter echoing through my apartment when we binge-watched rom-coms, her promises to always have my back. It all felt like a lie now, twisted and tainted. But it wasn't just their betrayal that gutted me. It was the realization that my life, as I knew it, was over. Ethan wasn't just my husband. He was my partner, my confidant, my safe place. The man I had trusted with every vulnerable part of me. And now that trust was gone. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed, my eyes red and swollen from a night of crying. I sat in the cramped kitchenette, sipping bitter motel coffee and scrolling aimlessly through my phone. Messages from Ethan flooded my inbox, long paragraphs alternating between apologies and pleas for me to come home. I was stupid. I made a mistake, but I love you. Please let me fix this. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It's over, I swear. You're my wife and I want to fight for us. Each message stung like a fresh wound. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that it was just a lapse in judgment, a fleeting mistake. But the photos told a different story. Their connection wasn't casual. It was intimate, deliberate. And it had gone on for years. For hours, I debated whether to respond. I typed and deleted a dozen replies, ranging from venomous anger to aching sadness. In the end, I didn't send any of them. Instead, I picked up my phone and called Clara, the photographer. "Hi, Clara. It's Emily Harper," I said, my voice shaky. "You photographed my wedding 5 years ago. I know I asked for those additional pictures, and I really appreciate your help, but I need to ask you something else." Clara's voice was warm and professional. "Of course, Emily. How can I help?" I hesitated, unsure how to phrase what I needed. "Do you remember my wedding? Specifically, did you notice anything unusual between my husband and the maid of honor?" There was a long pause. I held my breath, waiting for her response. "I try not to make judgments about my clients," Clara said carefully. "But yes, I noticed some tension between them. I didn't want to assume anything, but the way they interacted, it stood out. I'm sorry if that's not what you want to hear." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "No, it's okay. Thank you for being honest." I'm really sorry you're going through this, Clara added softly. If there's anything else I can do, please don't hesitate to ask. I thanked her and hung up, feeling both validated and devastated. It wasn't just in my head. Someone else had seen it even back then. How could I have been so blind? Over the next few days, I began piecing together a plan. I needed to decide what came next, not just with Ethan but with my entire life. The idea of going back to him felt impossible, but the thought of starting over was equally terrifying. I was 32 years old, and for the past decade, my identity had been intertwined with his. Who was I without him? I took some time off work, telling my boss I had a family emergency. Then, I drove to my parents' house in the suburbs, hoping for the comfort of familiarity. My mom greeted me at the door, her face lined with concern when she saw my tear-streaked cheeks. "What happened, sweetheart?" she asked, pulling me into a hug. For the first time, I told someone the whole story. I didn't sugarcoat it or try to downplay my pain. I laid it all out, the photos, the affair, the lies. My mom listened silently, her hand on mine, her eyes welling with tears. "You don't have to decide anything right away," she said when I finished. "Take your time. Figure out what you need." But time didn't bring clarity. If anything, it brought more questions. Ethan kept calling, his voice breaking as he begged me to come home. He swore he'd do anything to make it right, therapy, counseling, whatever it took. He even suggested quitting his job, claiming it would prove his commitment to rebuilding our trust. And then there was Jessica. She hadn't reached out at all, which in a way hurt even more. A part of me wanted to call her, to demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to hear her voice. What could she possibly say to justify what she had done? One night, as I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, I decided to dig deeper. If Ethan wanted me to believe it was over, I needed proof. I logged into our shared phone account and checked the call records. My heart sank when I saw her number listed repeatedly. Late-night calls that had continued up until just a few months ago. Fueled by a mixture of rage and heartbreak, I took it a step further. I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, even paranoid, but I needed to know the full truth. I couldn't make a decision about my marriage without understanding the scope of their betrayal. The investigator worked quickly, and within a week I had a folder of information. Hotel receipts, emails, photos of them together. The evidence was damning. Their affair hadn't ended when Jessica moved. It had just gone underground. They had met in secret whenever she came back to town, their trysts carefully planned to avoid suspicion. When I confronted Ethan with the evidence, he didn't even try to deny it this time. He broke down completely, sobbing as he confessed everything. "I was weak," he said. "I made a horrible mistake. But I love you, Emily. I've always loved you." His words felt like poison. "You don't betray someone you love," I snapped. "You don't lie to them for years." The days that followed were a blur of painful decisions. I filed for divorce despite Ethan's pleas for reconciliation. It wasn't an easy choice. There were moments when I doubted myself, moments when I wondered if I was throwing away a decade of love. But in the end, I couldn't stay with someone who had betrayed me so deeply. As for Jessica, I never spoke to her again. She didn't try to contact me, and I didn't seek her out. She became a ghost, a shadow of a friendship that had once meant everything to me. It's been a year now. I've moved into a small apartment downtown, and I'm slowly rebuilding my life. Some days are harder than others. I still catch myself reaching for my phone to text Ethan about something funny that happened, only to remember that he's no longer part of my world. But I'm learning to be okay with that. I've started therapy, taken up painting, and even joined a hiking group. I'm rediscovering who I am without him, and while it's not always easy, it's liberating in a way I never expected. Looking back, I realized the betrayal didn't just break me. It forced me to grow. It taught me to trust my instincts, to value myself, and to never settle for less than I deserve. And for that, I'm grateful. In the quiet moments of my new life, I've found an odd kind of clarity. Betrayal, as devastating as it is, strips away illusions. It forces you to confront not just the lies someone else told you, but the ones you told yourself. For years, I had convinced myself that Ethan and I were unbreakable, that our love was immune to the cracks that toppled other relationships. Now I understood that love doesn't fail overnight. It erodes slowly, one unspoken truth, one ignored red flag at a time. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected email. It was from Clara, the wedding photographer. She had stumbled upon my Instagram, where I'd been documenting my journey of self-recovery, and decided to reach out. Hi Emily. I hope this email doesn't feel intrusive, but I've been following your story online, and I just wanted to say how inspiring your resilience is. I've seen a lot of love stories through my lens, but few people are brave enough to rebuild their own when it shatters. I don't know if this means anything coming from a stranger, but I'm rooting for you. Best, Clara. Her message brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't just the kindness of her words. It was the reminder that someone else had witnessed the cracks in my marriage before I did. Clara's lens had unknowingly captured not just the love I thought we shared, but the betrayal that had lurked in the shadows. I replied, thanking her for her message and for her role in helping me uncover the truth. Her response came quickly, and it turned into a series of exchanges. We talked about everything: photography, relationships, healing. Over time, our conversations became a comfort, a thread of connection in my fractured world. Clara had a way of seeing the beauty in imperfection, of finding meaning in the moments most people overlooked. It was a perspective I desperately needed. One day, Clara invited me to join her on a photo shoot. She was working on a personal project about resilience and wanted to include me. I hesitated at first. Posing for a camera felt vulnerable in a way I wasn't sure I was ready for. But something about her invitation felt like an opportunity to reclaim a piece of myself. So I said yes. The shoot took place in a sunlit field just outside the city. Clara guided me gently, encouraging me to let go and simply exist in the moment. As the camera clicked, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For so long, I had been defined by my role as Ethan's wife, by the image of our perfect marriage. Now I was stepping into a new version of myself, one that didn't rely on anyone else's validation. When Clara sent me the finished photos, I was stunned. She had captured something I hadn't seen in myself in years: strength, grace, and an unshakable sense of hope. Months turned into a year, and life began to feel lighter. I started a new job at a local nonprofit, working on community outreach programs. The work was fulfilling, and it gave me a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. I also began to reconnect with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, reminding me that I wasn't as alone as I had once felt. And then there was Clara. What had started as an unlikely friendship began to grow into something more. At first, I resisted the feelings that surfaced when we were together. The warmth in her smile, the way her laugh lit up a room, felt too soon, too complicated. But Clara, with her quiet confidence and unwavering support, never pressured me. She gave me the space to heal, to figure out what I wanted. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself sitting in Clara's studio. We were sharing a bottle of wine, laughing about the chaos of her latest wedding shoot. As the conversation quieted, she looked at me, her expression soft but serious. "Emily," she said, "you're allowed to let yourself be happy again." Her words hit me like a gentle wave, washing away the last remnants of doubt. For so long I had been afraid to open myself up, to risk being hurt again. But Clara had shown me that love wasn't about perfection. It was about seeing each other fully, flaws and all, and choosing to stay. I reached for her hand, my heart pounding. "I think I'm ready," I whispered. Our relationship unfolded slowly, like a flower blooming after a harsh winter. Clara taught me that love doesn't have to be grand gestures or sweeping promises. It can be quiet moments of understanding, shared laughter, and the comfort of knowing someone sees you for who you truly are. For the first time in years, I felt free, not just from the pain of Ethan's betrayal, but from the weight of trying to live up to an ideal that was never real. Clara and I built something new, something honest. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Ethan reached out once, about a year and a half after the divorce. He wanted to meet, to talk, to see if there was any chance of reconciliation. For a moment I considered it. There was a time when I couldn't imagine my life without him. But as I sat there, reading his message, I realized something. I didn't need closure from him. I had already found it within myself. I replied politely, wishing him well but making it clear that our story was over. Now as I sit here writing this, I feel a sense of peace I never thought I'd find. My life isn't what I imagined it would be when I stood at that altar 5 years ago, but in many ways it's better. I've learned that love isn't about who stands beside you in the wedding photos. It's about who shows up for you when the camera isn't there. And as I look at the photo Clara took of me that day in the sunlit field, I see a woman who is finally free. Free to love, to grow, and to create a life that is beautifully, authentically her own. The seasons rolled by, and my new life unfolded with a quiet beauty. I no longer measured time in anniversaries or milestones tied to someone else's narrative. Instead, my calendar became filled with moments of my own making, weekend hikes with friends, long evenings spent painting in my apartment, and the steady rhythm of my work at the nonprofit. Clara and I continued to grow together, our lives intertwining in ways that felt natural and unforced. She wasn't just my partner. She was my muse, my cheerleader, and my closest confidant. Her photography business had taken off in the past year, with her personal project on resilience gaining attention from art galleries and magazines. The photos she had taken of me became part of the series, a visual testament to my journey. Seeing them displayed at a gallery opening was surreal, like stepping outside myself to witness the transformation from pain to strength. Clara stood beside me that evening, her hand resting lightly on the small of my back. "You're the reason this project exists," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me with your story." I turned to her, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "No, Clara. You're the reason I believed in my story again." As much as life felt settled, there were still moments when the past lingered like a shadow. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in my storage unit, I stumbled across the wedding album. The leather cover was dusty, the edges slightly worn. My first instinct was to toss it into the nearest donation bin and walk away, but something made me pause. I carried it back to my apartment and set it on the coffee table, staring at it for a long time. Clara found me there when she got home, my hands resting on the closed album. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern etched across her face. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to burn this thing and never think about it again. But another part of me feels like I need to face it." Clara nodded and sat beside me, her presence steady and grounding. "You don't have to do it alone." Taking a deep breath, I opened the album. The first few pages were like a punch to the gut, smiling faces, heartfelt moments, and a version of myself that felt like a stranger. But as I flipped through, I noticed something unexpected. The photos no longer held the same power over me. The pain that had once been so sharp was now dulled like an old scar. I could look at them and see the cracks I had missed, the warning signs I had ignored. But I could also see the woman I used to be, hopeful, trusting, and full of love. When I reached the last page, I closed the album and set it aside. "I think I'm finally ready to let this go," I said. Clara smiled, her eyes soft. "Then let's do it." That weekend, we drove to a nearby beach with the album tucked under my arm. The waves crashed against the shore as I stood at the water's edge, the cool sand shifting beneath my feet. I held the album for a moment, saying a silent goodbye to the dreams it once represented. Then with a deep breath, I let it go. The tide carried it away, and I watched until it disappeared beyond the horizon. In the months that followed, I threw myself into new projects. Clara and I traveled together, exploring places I had only dreamed of visiting. We spent a week in the mountains, hiking through misty trails and sleeping under the stars. We wandered through the streets of Paris, her camera clicking as I laughed at her attempts to pronounce French phrases. Each trip was a reminder that life was vast and full of possibilities, far beyond the narrow confines of my past. Work at the nonprofit also took an exciting turn. Our team launched a new initiative focused on helping women rebuild their lives after personal hardships. I shared my story at a fundraiser, nervous but determined to show that healing was possible. The response was overwhelming. So many women approached me afterward, sharing their own experiences of heartbreak and resilience. One woman, a young mother named Danielle, stood out. Her husband had left her for someone else, and she was struggling to find her footing. "How did you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How did you move on?" I didn't have an easy answer for her. "One step at a time," I said. "And by letting yourself believe that you deserve better. Because you do." Her eyes filled with tears and she hugged me tightly. In that moment, I realized that my pain had a purpose. It wasn't just something to endure. It was something I could use to help others. On our second anniversary, Clara surprised me with a trip to the same field where we had done that first photo shoot. She brought her camera, of course, and as the golden light of sunset bathed the landscape, she knelt in the tall grass and pulled out a small box. "Emily," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly, "you taught me what it means to love without fear, to see someone for who they truly are and choose them anyway. I don't want to spend another day without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She slipped the ring onto my finger, and we laughed and cried together as the sun dipped below the horizon. Our wedding was nothing like the one I had envisioned all those years ago, but it was perfect in its simplicity. We held it in that same field, surrounded by a small circle of friends and family. My parents walked me down the aisle, their pride and love shining in their eyes. Clara's sister officiated, her voice warm and full of joy. As we exchanged vows, I looked into Clara's eyes and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had shown me that love could be soft and steady, a quiet strength that didn't demand or take but simply gave. When we kissed, the crowd erupted into cheers, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, pure, unfiltered happiness. Now, as I sit in the home Clara and I built together, I feel a deep sense of peace. Life isn't perfect. There are still hard days, moments of doubt, and the occasional lingering shadow of the past. But I've learned that perfection isn't the goal. Growth, connection, and authenticity are. The journey from betrayal to healing wasn't easy, but it led me here, to a life filled with love and purpose. And for that, I'll always be grateful. The years continued to pass, each one layering new chapters onto the life Clara and I built together. As time moved on, the wounds of the past faded into the background, no longer sharp or consuming. They became part of the landscape of my life, reminders of where I had been and how far I had come. Clara's career blossomed in ways neither of us could have anticipated. Her project on resilience gained international acclaim, leading to speaking engagements, gallery exhibitions, and even a book deal. Watching her passion unfold was inspiring, and I often found myself assisting her during shoots or organizing events for her growing audience. I wasn't just her partner. I was her biggest fan and she was mine. Meanwhile, my work at the nonprofit evolved into something even more meaningful. After several years of dedicating myself to supporting women in need, I was offered the opportunity to lead a new program, a mentorship initiative pairing women who had overcome significant challenges with those just beginning their journeys. It felt like a culmination of everything I had learned and experienced. Accepting the role felt like stepping fully into my purpose. One unexpected moment of reckoning came when Danielle, the young mother I had mentored early in my nonprofit career, invited me to coffee. By then, years had passed since we first met. Danielle had rebuilt her life beautifully. She had started her own business, her kids were thriving, and she radiated a confidence that was a joy to witness. As we sipped our lattes, she leaned across the table, her expression thoughtful. "Emily," she began, "I know this might sound strange, but I want to thank you. Not just for helping me back then, but for showing me what forgiveness can look like." I tilted my head, curious. "Forgiveness?" She nodded. "I remember how you talked about your ex-husband and your friend. You never sugarcoated the pain, but you also never let bitterness define your story. It inspired me. I realized I didn't want to carry that weight either." Her words stayed with me long after our coffee date. Had I truly forgiven Ethan and Jessica? I hadn't thought about them in years. For a long time they had been like ghosts, lingering at the edges of my mind. But as I reflected on Danielle's words, I realized that forgiveness had come quietly, without ceremony. It wasn't about absolving them or forgetting what they had done. It was about freeing myself from their shadow. A few months later, life brought an unexpected twist. I received an email from Ethan. "Hi, Emily. I hope this email doesn't come as a shock. I've thought about writing to you many times over the years, but wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. Recently, I saw your nonprofit's work featured in a news article, and it made me realize I owe you something I've never properly given. An apology. I'm sorry, Emily, for everything. For betraying your trust, for not being the husband you deserved, and for causing you so much pain. I know it's far too late to make amends, but I hope you've found happiness. You deserve that and so much more. Take care. Ethan." Reading his words, I felt a strange mix of emotions, surprise, sadness, and oddly enough, gratitude. He didn't deserve my forgiveness, but I had already given it, Not for him but for myself. I didn't reply to the email. There was nothing more to say. His words felt like the closing of a door that had long been ajar, and I let it quietly latch. Life carried on, full of rich and vibrant moments. Clara and I eventually decided to expand our family, something we had talked about for years but never rushed into. After much thought and planning, we welcomed a little boy into our lives through adoption. We named him Noah, and from the moment he arrived, our world shifted in the most beautiful way. Parenthood brought its own challenges and joys. Noah was curious and full of energy, his laughter filling our home with a lightness I hadn't known I needed. Watching Clara with him only deepened my love for her. She had a natural warmth and patience that made her an incredible mother. Together we navigated sleepless nights, first steps, and the chaos of toddlerhood, our bond growing stronger with every milestone. One afternoon years later, as I sat on the porch watching Noah play in the yard, Clara joined me with 2 cups of tea. She handed me one and leaned back in her chair, her gaze soft as she watched our son chase a butterfly. "You know," she said, breaking the comfortable silence, "sometimes I think about how life has this incredible way of surprising us. If someone had told me 10 years ago that I'd be sitting here, with you and Noah, I wouldn't have believed them." I smiled, reaching for her hand. I wouldn't have believed it either, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. We sat there hand in hand, the weight of the past long gone. Life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt and worry, but it was ours. It was real, honest, and full of love. Looking back, I can see now that every twist and turn led me here. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they were all part of the journey, shaping me into the person I had become. I wasn't the woman who walked down the aisle all those years ago, naive and trusting, but I wasn't bitter or broken either. I was whole. I was free. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the yard in golden light, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Life had brought me full circle, not to the place I had planned but to the place I was meant to be. And for that I was endlessly grateful. As time passed, our family settled into a rhythm that felt almost magical in its simplicity. Mornings were chaotic but joyful. Noah running around the house with mismatched socks, Clara trying to pack lunches while I chased him down to brush his hair. Evenings were our sanctuary, filled with laughter, stories, and quiet moments after Noah was asleep, when Clara and I would sit on the couch and simply be. One rainy evening, as I tucked Noah into bed, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mommy," he said, his little face peeking out from under the covers, "did you always know you wanted me?" I blinked, momentarily speechless. How could I explain to a 5-year-old that he wasn't just wanted? He was a miracle, a gift that had healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. I leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Noah, I didn't always know I wanted you because I didn't know you yet. But when you came into our lives, it felt like you were always meant to be here. You were always in my heart, even before I knew your name." He smiled sleepily, his tiny hand reaching for mine. "I love you, Mommy. I love you too, baby," I whispered, my heart swelling as I kissed his forehead and turned off the light. Noah's presence in our lives brought a renewed sense of purpose for both Clara and me. I threw myself even deeper into my work, expanding the mentorship program and launching a series of workshops for single mothers and women rebuilding their lives. The nonprofit began partnering with larger organizations, and soon I found myself speaking at conferences and leading panels. Public speaking had never been my strength, but sharing my story and helping others find their voices made every moment of vulnerability worth it. One day, after a particularly emotional workshop, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She looked to be in her early 40s, her face lined with weariness but her eyes alight with hope. "Emily," she said, her voice trembling, "I've been carrying so much anger for so long. Hearing you talk about forgiveness, I don't know if I'm ready yet, but I think I want to try." I reached out and took her hand. "That's the first step," I said. "You don't have to rush it. Forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. Take your time." As she walked away, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. My pain had given me the ability to connect with others in a way I never thought possible. It wasn't just about healing myself anymore. It was about being a part of a larger tapestry of resilience and growth. Meanwhile, Clara's career continued to soar. Her Resilience series expanded into a global movement, with exhibitions in cities across the world. I traveled with her whenever I could, bringing Noah along when it was feasible. Watching Clara present her work to packed galleries, her voice steady and passionate, filled me with pride. One of her exhibitions was in London, and it coincided with our anniversary. Clara, ever the romantic, surprised me with a private dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the Thames. As we sipped wine and shared dessert, she reached across the table to take my hand. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Not just us but you. The Emily I met years ago was strong, but the Emily sitting in front of me now, she's unstoppable." Her words warmed me and I smiled. You know, I think I finally understand something my mom used to say. She'd tell me that life doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you need to grow. I didn't understand it back then, but now, I do. Clara raised her glass. "To growth," she said, her smile radiant. "To growth," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. Back home, life continued in its steady, beautiful way. Noah started school, quickly becoming the curious, talkative child who made friends with everyone. Clara and I navigated the balance of work, parenting, and our relationship with a kind of unspoken harmony. We weren't perfect, but we didn't need to be. We communicated, we supported each other, and above all, we laughed a lot. One evening, after putting Noah to bed, I was going through some old boxes in the attic. I found a journal I had kept during the early days after leaving Ethan. Flipping through its pages, I was struck by how raw and uncertain I had been back then. My words were filled with questions. Who am I now? What comes next? Will I ever feel whole again? Tears pricked at my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude. I had been so lost, so broken, but I had found my way. And not just because of Clara or Noah or my work, though they were all part of it. I had found my way because I had chosen to keep going, even when it felt impossible. Clara found me sitting on the floor of the attic, the journal open in my lap. She sat down beside me, her arm wrapping around my shoulders. "What's this?" she asked softly. "Just a piece of the past," I said, leaning into her. "It's a reminder of how far we've come." She kissed my temple, her voice gentle. "You've come farther than anyone I know, Emily." And in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of my old fears and the warmth of my present life, I realized something profound. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Years later, as I watched Noah graduate from high school, I felt an overwhelming wave of pride. Clara stood beside me, her hand in mine, and we cheered as he walked across the stage. Our boy, curious, determined, and full of life, was ready to take on the world. When he turned back to wave at us, I saw it in his eyes, the same resilience that had carried me through my darkest days. And I knew that no matter where life took him, he would be okay, just like I was.